Admiral Hannah Park stood at the viewport of the command deck, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared at the distant lights of the Caldarian warships. Even from this distance, their sleek, predatory shapes were visible against the blackness of space. 5 days since they had arrived without warning. 5 days since humanity learned they were not alone in the universe. "Admiral, we've lost contact with Europa Station," reported Lieutenant Kang, his voice tight. "That makes 6 outposts gone silent in the last hour." Hannah didn't turn. "And our colonies beyond Mars?" "Nothing since yesterday. The convoys have all been destroyed." Lieutenant Kang paused. "The President is requesting an update on our defensive capabilities." "Tell her I'll report personally in 30 minutes, Hannah said, finally turning from the viewport. The command center of Earth Orbital Defense Station Alpha buzzed with controlled panic. Officers moved with purpose, but fear shadowed their eyes. The Caldarians had appeared simultaneously at every entry point of the solar system. Over 300 vessels, each dwarfing Earth's largest battleship. Their technology was unlike anything humans had ever developed. Sleek, organic-looking ships that seemed to bend light around them. "Put the tactical display on the main screen," Hannah ordered. A 3-dimensional map of the solar system appeared, red markers showing Caldarian positions. They formed a perfect sphere around the solar system, with heavier concentrations near Earth, Mars, and the major mining operations in the asteroid belt. "A complete blockade," Hannah murmured. "They're cutting us off from our own resources." An hour later, Hannah stood in the virtual presence of the United Earth Government Security Council. President Jin's hologram looked haggard, her usual composure cracking. "Give me something, Admiral." "Anything," the President said. "Madam President, I won't sugarcoat this. The Caldarian fleet outmatches us in every measurable way. Their ships have energy shielding we can't penetrate with our current weapons. Their propulsion systems allow maneuvers that would tear our vessels apart. If we engage directly, we will lose." Defense Minister Choi leaned forward. "What about the orbital defense platforms? They might destroy a few ships, but the Caldarians would retaliate before we could make a dent in their forces." "So you're saying we're defenseless?" asked the Minister of Science, her voice sharp. "I'm saying we need to be smart," Hannah replied. "They haven't attacked yet. They're blockading us, not bombarding us. That gives us time." "Time for what?" President Jin asked. "Time to find alternatives to direct confrontation." After the meeting, Hannah authorized a covered shuttle to the orbital research platform known simply as Station Omega. The facility wasn't on any official records, a joint project between the military and a small group of theoretical physicists who had been exploring concepts too radical for mainstream science. Dr. Ta Kim met her in the sparse docking bay. He was younger than she expected, with intense eyes and a perpetual slight frown. His lab coat was wrinkled, suggesting he'd been working without rest. "Admiral Park," he said with a quick bow. "I heard about the Security Council meeting. They want weapons, I assume." "They want miracles," Hannah replied. "I'm here because your name came up in a classified file about experimental propulsion." Tae's eyes narrowed. "The Quantum Displacement Project. The military defunded us 3 years ago. Said it was too theoretical, no practical applications. Things have changed. Show me what you've been working on." Tad led her through the station to a laboratory dominated by a complex apparatus of interlocking rings and pulsing energy conduits. At its center floated a small metallic sphere, seemingly suspended without support. "This is just the prototype," Tai explained. "The theory is simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. Conventional engines push against space. My drive slips between spaces." "Between spaces?" Ta smiled slightly. "Reality isn't as solid as it appears. There are gaps. Theoretical spaces between what we perceive as continuous. My drive finds those gaps and allows matter to move through them, bypassing normal space entirely." "Could a ship equipped with this drive pass through the Caldarian blockade?" Theoretically, yes. They wouldn't even see it, Ta said. But we're years away from scaling this to anything larger than a probe. Hannah watched the floating sphere. Dr. Kim, we don't have years. The Caldarians sent their terms an hour ago. Tay's expression darkened. What do they want? Earth. Complete surrender of all military assets. Integration into their hegemony as a client world. And if we refuse, they've positioned ships to intercept all resource shipments from the outer system. They're going to slowly starve us into submission. Back on Earth, panic was spreading. News of the blockade had leaked, and markets crashed as people rushed to stockpile supplies. In Seoul, Hannah's home city, she watched from her temporary apartment as people filled streets, voices raised in fear and anger. The United Earth government announced rationing within days. Essential supplies only. Power conservation measures. Recycling mandates. The Caldarians allowed just enough supply ships through to prevent immediate humanitarian crisis, a calculated move that showed they understood human psychology. They were offering just enough hope to prevent desperate action. Hannah spent her days reviewing hopeless battle plans and her nights staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating odds. Every simulation ended the same way. Earth's fleet destroyed, defenses overwhelmed, surrender inevitable. 2 weeks into the blockade, she received an encrypted message from Station Omega. Just 4 words. We found something. Come. When she arrived, Tai was vibrating with barely contained energy. We did deep scans of the Caldarian ships, he said without preamble, leading her to his lab. Their hulls contain exotic particles that interact with my drive technology. Meaning what? Hannah asked. They use something similar, Ta said. Not identical, but related principles, which means they might have the same limitations. For the first time since the blockade began, Hannah felt a spark of hope. What limitations? Ta pointed to a simulation on his screen showing a Caldarian ship surrounded by a strange, fluctuating field. Their drives create a dimensional pocket around their ships. It's what makes them so maneuverable and protected. But the energy requirements must be enormous. So they have a weakness. Potentially. If we could force them to overextend that field, create interference patterns in the dimensional frequency they're using, we might be able to disrupt their systems. Hannah studied the simulation. Could we use this to break the blockade? Not yet, Tai admitted. But it gives us direction. A possible counter-strategy. If you can get me more data on their ships, I'll get you whatever you need, Hannah promised. Just work fast, Doctor. Earth's supplies won't last forever. As she left Station Omega, Hannah looked back at the distant Earth, blue and vulnerable against the vastness of space. Somewhere out there, humanity's distant colonies were cut off, facing their own struggles against the Caldarian hegemony. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe they might not be cornered after all. The Caldarians thought they had humanity trapped. They didn't understand that humans were at their most dangerous when desperate. And thanks to Dr. Ta Kim's work, humanity now had something even more important than a weapon. They had hope. The old mining tunnel under Olympus City on Mars wasn't on any official maps. Gina Lee liked it that way. 6 months into the Caldarian blockade, secrets had become humanity's most valuable currency. Gina's headlamp illuminated the rough walls as she carefully chipped at a vein of blue-black crystal. Unlike the copper and iron that had first brought humans to Mars, this material had no name in any Earth language. The crystal caught her light and seemed to swallow it, reflecting nothing. Just like the Caldarian hulls, she whispered to herself, placing the sample in a containment bag. A soft beep from her wrist communicator broke the silence. 3 short pulses. The emergency signal. Gina quickly packed her tools and samples, heart racing as she hurried back through the winding tunnel. She emerged into an abandoned storage facility that served as her makeshift lab. Her research partner, Min, was waiting, his face tense. Patrol drones moving through the eastern sector, getting closer. Did they scan this area? Not yet, but they're on a search pattern. We need to move the samples. Together, they packed the crystals into special lead-lined containers that blocked conventional scans. Ever since Gina had discovered the strange mineral formations 6 months ago, they'd been working in secret, away from the increasingly watchful eyes of the Kildarian observers who now supervised Mars' colony. "Any word from Admiral Park?" Gina asked as they worked. Message came through on the old radio frequencies. They're ready for the next shipment. Maintenance drone leaves tomorrow. The Kildarians allowed basic maintenance drones to travel between Mars and Earth, considering the simple machines too primitive to pose any threat. They never suspected that humans had modified these drones to carry tiny compartments of carefully packaged samples, or that these samples might be the key to humanity's survival. On Earth, Admiral Hannah Park stood in the underground bunker that had become the heart of the resistance. 50 meters beneath the old Seoul subway system, the facility had once been a Cold War relic. Now it hummed with activity as scientists and military personnel worked around the clock. The latest shipment from Mars arrived, reported Captain Yoon, placing the small container on the table. Dr. Lee included notes about her findings. Hannah nodded. "Get these to Dr. Kim immediately." 6 months had changed Hannah. The crisp uniform and formal bearing remained, but new lines marked her face. Sleep was a luxury few resistance leaders could afford. She made her way through narrow corridors to the main lab where Dr. Ta Kim hunched over complex equipment, his fingers flying over controls. The prototype quantum displacement drive sat in the center of the room, no longer a small floating sphere, but a massive ring structure that pulsed with blue energy. "You look pleased," Hannah noted as she entered. Ta looked up, his tired face breaking into a rare smile. "We had a successful test this morning. Displaced a probe 15 kilometers and brought it back intact. Any sign the Kildarians detected it?" "None. The displacement field leaves no energy signature they can track." He paused. "Is that the new sample from Mars?" Hannah handed him the container. "Dr. Lee believes these crystals are similar to the material in Kildarian hull plating." Tai opened the container carefully, his eyes widening as he examined the blue-black crystal. "This is remarkable. The molecular structure." He placed it under a scanner, and complex patterns appeared on his screen. "This isn't naturally occurring." Lee's notes suggest the same. She thinks they're remnants of technology from a civilization that lived on Mars long before humans arrived, a civilization that might have encountered the Kildarians. If we can understand how these crystals interact with dimensional fields, we might be able to improve the drive. Taz's fingers tapped rapidly on his keyboard, or even develop countermeasures against Kildarian shields. "How soon can you have results?" "Days for preliminary findings. Weeks for anything practical." He looked up at her. "How's the Defiance coming along?" Hannah's expression tightened. "Behind schedule. The shipyard teams can only work during the brief windows when satellite coverage is minimal. And finding parts without alerting Kildarian observers has been challenging. The Defiance was their greatest gamble, an outdated freighter being secretly retrofitted in an abandoned underwater facility in the Sea of Japan. If they could equip it with Kim's drive, they might be able to break through the blockade, reach their distant colonies, and find allies. "We'll get there," Ta said with uncharacteristic optimism. "This crystal might be exactly what we needed." 2 days later, in the underwater shipyard, Engineer Supark, no relation to the Admiral, cursed softly as he struggled to integrate an old power coupling into the Defiance's new systems. The freighter had seen better days, its hull patched in dozens of places, but it was the only ship they could acquire without raising suspicion. "Need a hand?" asked a voice behind him. Su turned to see Jun, one of the younger engineers. "Unless you've got a brand new Type 7 coupling hidden in your pocket, not really." Jun grinned and pulled something from his bag. "Not Type 7, but I modified a Type 5 to handle a power load. Should work." Su stared at the component. "Where did you get this?" "Agricultural station in Hokkaido." They use these for their hydroponic systems. I traded some black market coffee for it. The resourcefulness of his team never ceased to amaze Sue. With official channels monitored and resources rationed, the resistance had developed a complex underground economy. Food, medicine, technical components, all flowed through networks of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. This might actually work, Sue said, examining the coupling. Good job. The Defiance was gradually taking shape. What had begun as a desperate plan was becoming reality, one smuggled part at a time. Back on Mars, Gina carefully packed her latest findings. The deeper she explored the abandoned tunnels, the more evidence she found that Mars had once housed a technologically advanced civilization, one that had left behind warnings about the Caldarians in crystal data structures that had taken her months to begin decoding. They were here before, she told Min as they prepared the maintenance drone for its Earth run. The Caldarians attacked them too, thousands of years ago. Did they win? Min asked, securing the hidden compartment. I don't know yet, but they developed defensive technologies using these crystals. Technologies that might have hurt the Caldarians badly enough that they left Mars alone for millennia. The drone's simple programming completed its diagnostic check. Tomorrow it would depart on its scheduled maintenance run to Earth's orbital platforms, carrying within it hopes that few dared speak aloud. As the long months of blockade stretched on, Earth's situation grew more desperate. Resources dwindled despite careful rationing. The Caldarians tightened their control, allowing just enough supplies through to prevent total collapse, while gradually increasing their demands for surrender. But beneath the surface, literally and figuratively, humanity was anything but defeated. In hidden labs, secret tunnels, and underwater facilities, a plan was taking shape. Dr. Kim's breakthrough came in the middle of the night. The crystal samples from Mars, when processed correctly, could amplify the quantum displacement field exponentially. The implications were enormous: smaller power requirements, greater range, and most importantly, the possibility of displacing something as large as the Defiance. When Admiral Park received the news, she made her decision. The mission couldn't wait any longer. Earth's window of opportunity was closing as Caldarian patrols increased and resources diminished. Prepare the Defiance for launch, she ordered, and select the crew. We're sending them through the blockade. The greatest gamble in human history was about to begin. Captain Dong Han had never expected to captain humanity's most important mission. Yet here he stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching his small crew prepare for what might be their final departure from Earth. Engine systems check complete, reported Engineer Sue, his fingers dancing across the outdated control panel. The Defiance looked like a standard cargo hauler on the outside, deliberately unremarkable. But its heart had been transformed by Dr. Kim's revolutionary drive. Life support stable, added Dr. Minna Song, the ship's medical officer and biologist. 14 months into the Caldarian blockade had left her, like all of them, thinner than before. Food rationing had taken its toll on Earth's population. Dong moved among his crew, checking final preparations. They were an unusual mix. 4 military officers, including himself, 3 civilian scientists, and 2 engineers, all volunteers, all aware they might never return. Communications secure, he asked Lieutenant G, their communications specialist. As secure as possible, Jai replied. But once we activate the displacement drive, we'll be cut off completely until we reach Proxima Centauri. The mission was simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution. Break through the Caldarian blockade using Dr. Kim's experimental drive. Reach humanity's furthest colony on Proxima Centauri, 4 light-years away, and find allies or technology that could help Earth. The Defiance would be the first human vessel to attempt interstellar travel without using the established jump gates, all of which were now controlled by the Caldarians. Admiral on deck called out Security Officer Yuna Kim as Admiral Park entered the bridge. Admiral Park looked at each crew member in turn. In 1 hour, you will embark on the most important journey in human history. The future of Earth depends on your success. Her words hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew the stakes. Earth's resources were dwindling despite careful rationing. The Caldarian blockade had tightened over the past year, allowing fewer supply ships through. Just last week, they had destroyed 3 research outposts on the Moon after detecting unusual energy readings, a warning to those who might resist. The displacement drive has been calibrated with the Martian crystal matrix, Admiral Park continued. Dr. Kim believes it will allow you to slip between the gaps in normal space, bypassing the blockade entirely. The Caldarians shouldn't be able to track you. And if they can, asked Dawn quietly. Then complete your mission before they catch you, she replied simply. As the crew made final preparations, Admiral Park pulled Captain Han aside. There's something else you should know, she said in a low voice. Dr. Lee's research on Mars has revealed more than we initially thought. The ancient civilization there didn't just encounter the Caldarians, they fought them off. Dawn's eyes widened. How? Their technology must have been incredibly advanced, yes. But the key wasn't offensive weapons. They developed a planetary shield using the same crystal formations we incorporated into your drive. A shield that could protect Earth. Admiral Park nodded. We're implementing the first phase now. Small-scale tests have been promising. But we need time. Time the Caldarians aren't giving us. That's why the United Earth government is publicly negotiating surrender terms. Surrender. Dong couldn't hide his shock. A deception. We're buying time while the shield matrix is constructed. But the Caldarians are growing suspicious. The moon base attacks were just the beginning. On Mars, Gina Lee worked frantically in her hidden laboratory. The destruction of the moon outposts had shaken everyone. The Caldarians were growing impatient, and her work had become even more dangerous. Look at this, she told Min, pointing to a holographic reconstruction of ancient Martian text. They describe the shield as a web of light that turns enemy fire back upon itself. Not just defensive but reflective. Can we replicate that? Min asked, his voice hushed despite their secure location. The principles are sound. I've transmitted the key equations to Earth. The shield matrix requires thousands of crystal nodes in precise geometric patterns. They've already begun installation under the guise of new weather monitoring equipment. Min looked troubled. The energy requirements must be enormous. They are, Gina agreed. That's the challenge Earth is facing now, generating enough power without the Caldarians noticing. Their conversation was interrupted by a proximity alarm. Caldarian patrol drones were scanning the area. Pack up, Gina ordered quickly. We need to move to backup Site C. As they carefully stored their equipment, Min asked, Do you think the Defiance will make it? Gina paused, thinking of the brave crew preparing to journey into the unknown. They have to, she said finally. We're all counting on them. Back on Earth, in the underwater launch facility, the Defiance prepared for departure. The launch window was narrow, a brief period when Caldarian patrol patterns would leave a small blind spot in their sensor coverage. Captain Han addressed his crew one final time. Once we activate the displacement drive, there's no turning back. The power requirements will drain our reserves, leaving us with just enough for one jump to Proxima Centauri. If anything goes wrong, he let the sentence hang unfinished. Dr. Minasong spoke up. We all volunteered knowing the risks, Captain. Earth is worth it. Nods of agreement passed through the small crew. Launch sequence initiating, reported Engineer Sue. Displacement drive powering up. The ship hummed with energy as the Martian crystals in the drive core began to glow with an eerie blue light. On the bridge displays, energy readings climbed steadily. Approaching critical threshold, warned Lieutenant G. Caldarian patrol ships will detect us in 3 minutes if we don't jump. Displacement field stabilizing. Sue called out. Ready for activation on your mark, Captain. Dong took a deep breath. For Earth, he said quietly, then louder. Engage displacement drive. The world seemed to bend around them. Colors shifted in impossible ways as the ship slipped between the fabric of normal space. Every crew member felt a momentary sensation of being everywhere and nowhere at once. Then silence. "Drive engaged," Sue reported, his voice filled with wonder. "We're between spaces." Outside the viewports, space looked different, slightly distorted, as if viewed through rippling water. The stars were smeared into lines of light. "Any sign the Kildarians detected our launch?" Dong asked. Lieutenant G checked her sensors. "Nothing. As far as I can tell, we're completely invisible to conventional detection." A collective breath of relief passed through the bridge. The first hurdle was cleared. They had successfully activated the drive. Now they needed to navigate through this strange between space to reach Proxima Centauri. As the Defiance began its historic journey, Admiral Park stood in the United Earth Government's Central Command, watching President Jin address the Kildarian representatives via video link. The president's performance was masterful, a carefully calculated show of a leader reluctantly bringing her people toward acceptance of Kildarian rule. "My government is prepared to discuss terms of integration into the hegemony," President Jin said, her voice appropriately subdued. "We ask only for assurances regarding the autonomy of our cultural institutions." The Kildarian envoy, a tall, elegant figure with iridescent skin, inclined its head. "The hegemony is pleased by your wisdom, President Jin. Preparations for the formal surrender ceremony will begin immediately." When the transmission ended, President Jin's demeanor changed instantly. "How much time did that buy us?" 2 weeks, maybe 3, Admiral Park replied. "The shield matrix installation is at 60%. Dr. Lee's latest designs have improved efficiency, but we're still short on power generation capacity." And the Defiance? Successfully away. No indication the Kildarians detected the launch. President Jin nodded grimly. "Then we continue the deception. Every day we gain brings us closer to a defense Earth hasn't had before. And the Kildarians aren't expecting." As night fell over a planet living under alien blockade, humanity's hopes traveled with a small, makeshift ship navigating between the spaces that separated stars, and with the ancient knowledge being unearthed from the red sands of Mars. The Kildarians thought they had humanity cornered, but the game was far from over. The Defiance emerged from dimensional space with a violent shudder. Warning alarms blared across the bridge as Captain Dong Han gripped his command chair. Displacement drive failing. Engineer Su shouted over the noise. Power fluctuations in all systems. "Emergency protocols," ordered Dong. "Shut down non-essential systems." The journey had taken 3 weeks in the strange between space where normal physics seemed optional. The Martian crystal matrix had held longer than expected, but the experimental drive wasn't designed for such an extended displacement. Lieutenant G's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain, we've arrived. Proxima Centauri system confirmed." Through the viewport, a reddish star glowed. Around it orbited several planets, including their destination, Proxima Centauri, humanity's furthest colony. "Life support stable but limited," reported Dr. Mena Song. "We have about 6 hours before critical systems fail completely." "Open a channel to the colony," Dong ordered. "Standard greeting protocol." Lieutenant G worked her console, then frowned. No response on usual frequencies. "Wait, I'm detecting unusual signal patterns. They're using. I don't recognize this protocol." "Could the Kildarians have reached here already?" Security Officer Yuna asked, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon. "Negative," Jai replied. "These aren't Kildarian communication patterns. They're something else. Keep trying all frequencies," Dong ordered. "And prepare a shuttle. We didn't come this far to fail now." As the crew worked to stabilize the damaged ship, a new alert sounded. "Multiple vessels approaching," Jai reported. "Small, fast-moving. Design unknown." The bridge crew watched as several sleek ships surrounded the Defiance. They were unlike anything built by humans or Kildarians, organic-looking craft with flowing lines that seemed to change shape slightly as they moved. "They're hailing us," G said with surprise. "In English." "Put it through," Dom ordered. A face appeared on the main screen, human, but with subtle differences. The woman had unusual violet eyes and patterns of light freckles that seemed to glow. "Unidentified Earth vessel, you are in protected space. State your intentions immediately." Commander Sung Choi stepped forward. As the Defiance's diplomatic officer, this was his moment. "This is Commander Sung Choi of the Earth vessel Defiance. We come seeking allies against the Caldarian blockade." The woman's expression changed from suspicion to shock. "You broke through the Caldarian blockade." "How?" "Experimental technology," Sung replied carefully. "Our ship is damaged and our situation desperate. Earth has been under blockade for over a year." After a long pause, the woman nodded. "Follow our escort to docking coordinates. Your arrival changes everything." 2 hours later, Sung and Captain Dong sat in a conference room inside what they now knew was the Proxima Coalition headquarters, a massive space station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Across from them sat representatives from not only the human colony, but 3 alien species. "We thought Earth had fallen," said Director Hannah Jong, the woman who had greeted them. Though fully human, she had been born on Proxima and had never seen Earth. "The Caldarians cut off all communication 18 months ago. Their blockade techniques are familiar to us all. The Caldarians have used this strategy for millennia," said Caleb, a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms. "Isolate, starve, absorb. They've consumed 1,000 worlds this way." "But not yours," Sung observed. "Not yet," replied Talith, a small reptilian creature with iridescent scales. "Each of our species escaped their attempted conquests. Distance protected us until recently." Director Jung leaned forward. 5 years ago, Caldarian scout ships arrived in this system. We knew what would follow. Instead of fighting separately, we formed the coalition. Humans, Aquari, Vrex, and Dothine, working together. Dong looked stunned. "All this time we thought we were alone in the universe until the Caldarians arrived. But you've been building alliances." "Necessity drove us," Director Jung said. "We've been preparing for the day the main Caldarian fleet arrives. Your news about Earth confirms our fears. They're expanding again." "Tell us about this technology that brought you here," said Morith, the 4th representative, a massive being with stone-like skin. Sung described Dr. Kim's quantum displacement drive and the Martian crystals that made it possible. Caleb's eyes widened. "The pathway stones. We thought they were just legends. The ancient Martians left records of them," Morith added. "We've been searching for similar deposits in this sector." "This changes our strategic position," Director Jung said. "If we can repair and replicate your drive technology, we might be able to strike back at the Caldarians rather than merely hide." "We need more than that," Dong said grimly. "Earth doesn't have much time." Back on Earth, Gina Lee stood with Admiral Park and President Jin in a hidden facility beneath the Pacific Ocean. Before them stretched a vast array of blue-black crystals arranged in precise geometric patterns, the Shield Matrix prototype. The design incorporates everything we learned from the ancient Martian records, Gina explained. Each crystal node creates a microscopic dimensional fold that, when linked with others, forms a continuous field. "And this will block Caldarian weapons?" President Jin asked skeptically. "Better," Gina smiled. "Watch." She activated the system. The crystals began to glow with an inner light, creating visible connections between nodes. A small drone representing a Caldarian ship fired an energy pulse at the field. Instead of blocking the beam, the shield seemed to absorb and redirect it, sending it back at the drone, which promptly exploded. "It doesn't just block, it reflects," Admiral Park said, eyes wide. "Just like the ancient records claimed." "Exactly," Gina confirmed. "The Caldarians use dimensional technology in their weapon systems. The shield creates interference patterns that reverse the energy flow. President Jin studied the prototype. How soon can we deploy this planet-wide? That's the problem, Jinnah admitted. Full planetary coverage would require thousands more crystal nodes than we currently have, and the energy requirements are enormous. Admiral Park had been quiet, her tactical mind working. Now she looked up with determination. What if we don't need to shield the entire planet right away? What do you mean? Asked Jinnah. Could we create strategic shield sections, not to protect Earth, but to create blind spots in the Caldarian sensor network? Jinnah considered this. Theoretically, yes. We could configure the shields to create localized dimensional pockets that their sensors can't penetrate. And inside those pockets, President Jin began. We could rebuild our fleet, Admiral Park finished. Create weapons and ships they can't detect until it's too late. In the Proxima system, the crew of the Defiance learned crucial information about their enemies. The Coalition had spent years studying Caldarian technology and biology. Their sensory organs are highly specialized, explained Talif, the Vrex scientist. They perceive dimensional energy directly. It's how they navigate space so effectively. But it's also a vulnerability. Their ships and weapons draw power from what they call the underspace, the dimensional gaps your drive navigates, added Caliph. Disrupt that connection, and their technology becomes useless. Commander Sung absorbed this information eagerly. Can you show us how to exploit these weaknesses? Director Zhang nodded. We've developed prototype weapons based on these principles. Nothing large-scale yet, but with your Martian crystals and our technical knowledge, we might create something that could turn the tide. How long would it take to repair our ship and equip it with these weapons? Captain Dong asked. Weeks, at minimum, Morath replied. But you won't be going alone. The Coalition has been building a fleet in secret, nothing that could stand against the full Caldarian force, but perhaps enough to break the Earth blockade if we have the element of surprise. For the first time in over a year, hope seemed tangible. On Earth, Admiral Park's plan moved forward rapidly. Strategic shield generators were positioned to create blind spots in the Caldarian sensor network. Within these invisible pockets, humans worked around the clock to build new ships incorporating the Martian crystal technology. The Caldarians sensed something was wrong, but couldn't pinpoint the source. Their ultimatums grew more demanding, the promised integration into their hegemony increasingly resembling outright enslavement. Little did they know that humanity was no longer alone, no longer defenseless, and no longer merely trying to survive the blockade. The counterattack was coming, from both within and beyond. Admiral Hannah Park stood on the bridge of the Earth flagship Guardian, watching as the combined fleet took formation. 3 years of blockade, suffering, and secret preparation had led to this moment. The view screen showed hundreds of ships, human vessels built in hidden shipyards alongside the exotic craft of their Proxima Coalition allies. Fleet reports ready, Admiral, said Captain Yoon, her second in command. Hannah nodded. And the shield matrix. Fully operational. Dr. Lee confirms all nodes are synchronized. Across the solar system, thousands of Martian crystal nodes had been positioned in a complex web, not as a defensive barrier as the Caldarians might expect, but as something far more dangerous, an amplification network for their weapons. Signal from the Defiance, Admiral, reported the communications officer. They've reached the outer marker with the Coalition fleet. On the view screen, a dimensional rift opened at the edge of the solar system. The Defiance emerged first, now barely recognizable after its upgrades at Proxima Centauri. Behind it came dozens of Coalition ships, their organic designs flowing like liquid metal against the blackness of space. The Caldarians are responding, Captain Yoon noted as red markers appeared on the tactical display. Their command vessel is moving to intercept. Just as we predicted, Hannah said with grim satisfaction. Is Dr. Kim ready? In position aboard the Guardian science deck. He says the modified displacement drive is operational. Hannah took a deep breath. Send the signal. Operation reversal begins now. Throughout the solar system, the hidden shield nodes activated simultaneously. Blue energy rippled in a vast web connecting Earth, Mars, and strategic points in between. The Caldarian blockade ships reacted immediately, their sensors detecting the sudden energy surge. "They're powering weapons," reported the tactical officer. "Hold position," Hannah ordered calmly. "Let them make the first move." The lead Caldarian vessel fired, a brilliant beam of energy that struck the shield web. Instead of dissipating, the energy traveled along the crystal network, growing stronger as it moved from node to node. Then, channeled through Earth's newly built fleet, it shot back at the Caldarian ships with multiplied force. 3 enemy vessels vanished in blinding explosions. "It works," someone shouted. "All ships advance according to plan," Hannah commanded. "Target priority vessels only." The Earth fleet moved forward while the coalition forces led by the Defiance attacked from the opposite direction. Caught between two forces, the Caldarian blockade began to break apart. On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Donghan directed his ship toward a cluster of Caldarian cruisers. Beside him stood Director Zheng and Commander Sung. "Dimensional weapons online," reported Engineer Su, who had remained with the ship through its transformation. "Coalition ships in supporting formation. Target their propulsion systems," Dong ordered. "Remember, we need to disable, not destroy." The Defiance fired, not conventional weapons, but concentrated dimensional pulses designed by the coalition scientists. When they struck the Caldarian vessels, the ships didn't explode but froze in space, their systems overloaded by the dimensional interference. "It's working," Commander Sung exclaimed. "Their shields are collapsing." But the Caldarians hadn't become the dominant force in the galaxy by being easily defeated. Their massive command vessel, 10 times the size of any Earth ship, plowed through the battle, its advanced weapons cutting through several human ships. "Guardian to all vessels," came Admiral Park's voice over the comm. "Fall back to Formation Delta. Draw the command vessel toward the central node cluster." The human and coalition ships executed a seemingly chaotic retreat, but one carefully designed to maneuver the Caldarian flagship into position. On the Guardian's science deck, Dr. Ta Kim worked frantically at his controls. The modified quantum displacement drive hummed with power, its crystal core glowing with blinding intensity. 5 minutes to maximum charge," he reported to Admiral Park. "We'll only get one attempt." "Understood," she replied. "Continue as planned." In space, the battle raged. Earth had the advantage of surprise and new technology, but the Caldarians had numbers and centuries of warfare experience. Human ships fell alongside Caldarian vessels, brave crews sacrificing themselves to maintain the complex ballet of movement needed for the trap. On Mars, Gina Lee monitored the shield matrix from her control center. "Energy levels reaching critical in sectors 7 through 12, she reported. "The matrix can't hold much longer." "It doesn't need to," replied Min. "Look." On their screens, the massive Caldarian command ship had moved into the center of the trap, surrounded by the most concentrated cluster of shield nodes. Aboard the Guardian, Dr. Kim's fingers flew across his controls. "Ready, Admiral. Displacement field at maximum capacity." "Now, Doctor," ordered Hannah. Kim activated the drive. Instead of moving the Guardian, he directed its energy outward, creating a massive dimensional distortion around the Caldarian flagship. Space itself seemed to bend and twist, forming a bubble of warped reality. Inside the bubble, the Caldarian ship froze, caught in a pocket where time moved differently, thousands of times slower than normal space. "It worked," Kim whispered, his voice filled with awe. "They're trapped." With their command vessel effectively removed from battle, the remaining Caldarian ships faltered. Some continued fighting, but others began to retreat, their perfectly coordinated blockade now in disarray. "All ships, press the advantage," Admiral Park ordered. "Drive them back." The combined Earth Coalition fleet surged forward, their weapons enhanced by the shield matrix. Caldarian vessels fell back in disorganized retreat, something no human had ever witnessed before. 3 hours later, the last Caldarian ships jumped away from the solar system. For the first time in 3 years, Earth was free. On the Guardian's bridge, Admiral Park received the incoming transmission from the trapped Caldarian command vessel. Time still flowed inside their bubble, just incredibly slowly, giving them enough awareness to communicate. The Caldarian High Commander appeared on screen. Tall, elegant, with iridescent skin that shifted colors with every movement. Its voice translated through the communication system. "You have accomplished what no species has in 10,000 years," it said, the words slow and measured. "The hegemony recognizes your achievement." "We want more than recognition," Admiral Park replied firmly. "We want our freedom, permanent and unconditional." The Caldarian seemed to consider this. "The hegemony has existed for millennia by absorbing worthy species. You have proven yourselves more than worthy." "We're not interested in absorption," Hannah countered, "but we are open to alliance as equals." After a long pause, the commander responded, "The Hegemony Council will need to consider this unprecedented situation. Until then, we propose a cessation of hostilities and withdrawal from your system, and our colonies, and our coalition allies." Included in the agreement, Admiral Park looked to President Jin, who had joined her on the bridge, and received a nod of approval. "We accept your proposal, Commander. Dr. Kim will release your vessel once your remaining ships have left the system." As the transmission ended, cheers erupted across the bridge. Similar celebrations spread across Earth as news of the victory reached the planet's surface. After 3 years of hardship, the blockade was broken. In the following days, cleanup and recovery began. The coalition ships established permanent embassies on Earth, beginning a new era of interspecies cooperation. The Martian crystal technology was now Earth's greatest resource and defense. 1 month after the battle, Admiral Park stood with Dr. Kim, Gina Lee, and Captain Dong on the observation deck of Earth Orbital Station Alpha, the same place where she had first witnessed the Caldarian blockade 3 years earlier. "The Caldarian diplomatic vessel arrives tomorrow," she said, looking out at the stars. "The beginning of formal negotiations." "Do you trust them?" asked Dong. "No," Hannah replied honestly. "But they respect strength and ingenuity. And we've demonstrated both." "And we're not alone anymore," added Gina, gesturing to where coalition ships orbited peacefully alongside human vessels. Dr. Kim smiled slightly. They thought they had humanity cornered, but they didn't understand what that meant. Cornered humans are at their most dangerous. "And they're most creative," Hannah added. As they looked out at the now free Earth below them, each reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The blockade that was meant to break humanity had instead forced them to reach beyond their limits, beyond their planet, and beyond their isolation in the universe. Earth had not just survived, it had emerged stronger, united with new allies, and ready to take its place among the stars.